Hello, good evening and welcome to FashMash Pioneers, the speaker series where Rachel Arthur and I bring together the world's brightest minds shaping the future of fashion. For those new here today, FashMash is a 10-year established global community with an aim at its heart of encouraging open conversation and sharing of ideas to shape the future of fashion. Tonight, we welcome a pioneer of sustainability who has been on our wish list as a speaker for years, Claire Bergkamp, the COO of global nonprofit Textile Exchange. She has been part of FashMash since she was the worldwide sustainability and innovation director at Stella McCartney. We're also lucky enough to have had her as a mentor on our mentoring scheme, Young Pioneers. It relaunches today and Claire returns as one of our 12 mentors. If you are interested in applying, please consider it. You need to be under 27 in an entry-level position and keen to shape a more sustainable fashion future through your career goals. You can find out more about the scheme, the criteria, and how to apply on our website, or Shedzi from our team will drop a link into the chat right now for you all. Before I go any further, I wanted to tell you a little bit more about our sponsor. It is Klaviyo, an e-commerce marketing platform for brands of all types, shapes and sizes, from Fenty to Marc Jacobs, and of course to FashMash. We use them for our email marketing and I have been delighted with the level of insights and the customer service that comes through them. So if you would like to give them a trial, we have the offer of a free trial. Just go to klaviyo.com/FashMash. That's KLAVIYO.com/FashMash, and you can start a free trial. We really thoroughly recommend them. So we are here in Fashion Revolution Week. It was very important to Rachel and I that we hosted this element of the speaker series during the week. As the world's largest fashion activist movement, the week offers the chance to reimagine a just and sustainable fashion system for people and the planet. I'm sure Claire and Rachel's thought-provoking discussion will do just that, as will your contributions. We would really value your thoughts and your questions for Claire and have a dedicated 10-minute Q&A at the end of the interview. So please do put your questions and general thoughts in either the Q&A box or the chat facility of this webinar. There is a short, urgent window to transform the industry. A key headline at COP26 last year was a policy to incentivize the use of environmentally preferred materials. It was presented by Textile Exchange. Claire led the charge, and it was backed by 50 companies and organizations in a bid to help them achieve their climate goals. Claire's view is that incentivizing better practice in materials sourcing through preferential tariffs would be a groundbreaking use of legislation for the industry. But what does it take to make this reality, and is it enough alone? That's just what Rachel and Claire will be discussing tonight. And I know that Rachel is also going to be grilling Claire on her position on degrowth and fashion's traditional business model, both of which I know are Rachel's passion and major topics of major specialist subjects for her. Finally, I just wanted to remind you about donations if you haven't yet. Since the pandemic, we have not been charging for tickets to our speaker series. Instead, we ask for donations to a charity of the speaker's choice to thank them for the time and expertise that they have given. This month, we will be supporting Textile Exchange, where, as I mentioned, Claire is COO. It is a global non-profit driving positive impact on climate change across the fashion and textile industry. Its goal is to help the industry achieve a 45% reduction by 2030 in the emissions that come from producing fibres and raw materials, accelerating the adoption of practices that improve the state of our water, soil health, and biodiversity. Please give what you can. FashMash Gives also donates to the charity of the Speaker's Choice every month. And recently we have donated to charities like SmartWorks, the Prince's Trust, Shelter, and Southall Black Sisters. Right, so just a couple more notices. As I mentioned, please do share your thoughts and questions in the Q&A or in the chat boxes of this webinar. Also join the conversation on social media. We are at FashMash on Instagram, at Fashion and Mash on Twitter, and our hashtag is FashMash. So it is time. Rachel, please I'm ready to hand over to you. Please, I was going to say join the stage, but it doesn't feel quite right on a webinar. And Claire, please do join the conversation too. Turn on your video. Thank you both.
And thank you so much, Rosanna. That was great. Claire, thank you so much for joining us. I am so thrilled we are finally doing this after many, many years of talking about it. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, no, massively. So we haven't seen each other in real life for a little while due to various personal and professional reasons, but last time we did so was at COP26 in Glasgow, where, as Rosanna just mentioned, you put out a large call for policy around environmentally preferred materials to help the industry reach its climate targets. That's the crux of tonight's conversation, essentially, all around regulation. So let's start there, if you would. Can you just talk a little bit about what this ask is about in more detail?
Yeah, so this is building off of work that we had actually started a few years previous. But the thought behind it is that there's been a lot of talk and there's a lot of movement towards regulation, which is absolutely required. So it's not to say we don't need regulation, but at the same time, we do need incentives. We need both the negative and the positive, the stick and the carrot. And so what we're proposing back out to governments is to leverage trade tariffs to reduce them or remove them for preferential environmentally preferred fibers and materials. So that could mean a tax break on importing organic recycled materials versus, not for conventional counterparts. We think that would help level the playing field when it comes to the sourcing and also help with scaling of these materials. The number one barrier to increasing the use of more sustainable materials, what we hear from brands, is cost, it's price. And some of that is just going to have to be factored in, frankly. I mean, we are going to see raw materials costing more, especially natural ones. That is the pathway forward, in the same way we will see that with food. And I think governments have a role in subsidizing and encouraging practices that will be resilient to climate change or potentially even help counteract parts of climate change.
And how was that received at COP? And we'll go in a little bit more detail later as to progress since, but at the time, how did it go down?
Completely positively. I think that now it's the implementation part of figuring out how we get this more seriously looked at within whatever channel that is, whether it's the US or the UK or maybe even the WTO. But the concept behind it has been extremely well received. Businesses are very supportive. I think that companies have big targets now around increasing their use of more sustainable fibers and materials, and anything that can help them do that, they're very, very positive around. In the industry in general, I mean, this really is kind of a win-win. It helps the planet, it helps the finance, for companies to be able to scale this faster. So we've had yet to have any negative pushback. It is just now how do we actually make it happen?
And we'll come back to that in terms of the sort of logistics of it. But from the brand side then, because that is a really interesting perspective to think about the sort of the need for them. I mean, you obviously come from industry, you were at Stella McCartney for many, many years. So how important is that for them, especially those sustainability first businesses, to actually continue the work they're doing and get ahead with it and prove the sort of value, I suppose?
I think for sustainability first businesses, it's probably not as much of a crux. I mean, I guess that there's, you'd be hard pressed to find a business that's leading with sustainability first that is massive. Yeah. I mean, there might be a few that, are putting it, I'd say, at the top of the list, but maybe not first and foremost. I think the businesses that we think of as being sustainability first are normally a bit smaller, and we're not talking about the scale of material that's being used in those really large companies. I think when we think about, very big businesses that are producing a lot, I think we'll get to this, and I know that you're really passionate about this topic. We have to slow growth. That is a part of it. Like, we can't just keep on making excuses and ways to have more. But even with that, we're still talking about a lot of scale. Like even if you slow growth down, we're still talking about, thousands of tons of materials being used. And to transform that at scale so that we're not just talking about 1% or 10%, we do have to have an economic unlock. And this is one of those enabling factors.
Yeah, I think it's incredibly interesting, but I want us to step back, because actually, when we're talking about scale, what we want to see, obviously, scale is those environmentally preferred fibres and materials. But can you give us a bit of a view on what preferred actually means, and then how important that is in that context to see it happen with those types of materials?
Yeah, the way we define preferred now is something that provides benefit socially or environmentally as compared to conventional. But it's actually something that we're working on updating our definition as well, because we want to make sure that there is that focus on aligning with a 1.5 degree pathway as well, not just saying better than, but actually saying scientifically based with outcomes that lead towards what we need to be seeing when it comes to carbon reduction, beneficial impacts on soil health, water, and biodiversity, really taking that view of how and what material creation should look like. So that's how we would define preferred. Is now I would say what we're looking at is something that is aligned with the 1.5 degree pathway, meaning that it is a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions as compared to conventional, and that it is additionally looking at benefits for human rights, animal welfare, biodiversity, soil health, and water, which is a lot. And not, animal welfare is obviously not relevant for every material, but where it is, we think those are things that need to be kept in view. There's this concept of climate tunnel vision or carbon tunnel vision, and we don't want that. You do have to keep that holistic view. If you just focus only on carbon, you miss the bigger picture. And it's very, especially when we're talking about, natural materials and ecosystem services and these systems on the ground. If you only focus on carbon, you will miss the ability to actually make the change you need to make. You have to be looking at biodiversity and soil health and everything else.
Yeah, and I like how well-rounded that is, but of course it does present that challenge, which you and I have talked about and worked on many times around data and around, really essentially one of the most controversial aspects of all of this currently, which is to say, what is and isn't considered sustainable, and all of the potential greenwashing that comes off the back of it. And this is a very, very thorny topic, and that in of itself actually is a completely different separate talk of its own. But the question I want to ask you then is sort of, when we're thinking about that landscape of data, is do you think that we can get to a place where we have, I don't want to say the word perfect data, because nothing's ever perfect, but very, very solid data to be able to make that sort of decision, to do that sort of decision making on a global, importantly on a global scale, and by global I mean regionalized on a global scale, of course.
I do think if you're not trying to have individual facility or farm level data, for everything in the world, that it starts to be possible. I think that like taking a regional or, country level view of impact is viable. I mean, one of the things we worked on together was the Global Fiber Impact Explorer. And I think that's, it's a risk-based way of looking at things, understanding risk local places. But one of the things that we're working on at Textile Exchange is geospatial monitoring for our certifications. So one of the standards that we developed is the responsible wool standard. And then we have a responsible mohair and alpaca standard as well. And through geospatial monitoring, we can actually look at things like grazing patterns. We can understand, what type of carbon release there might be occurring, looking at ground cover of crops or grassland regeneration. And you are adding in proxies, and not to get too into the weeds, you are making an assumption based on what you're seeing. But that is a huge step from where we are right now, where we're mostly relying on life cycle analysis reports, which are in themselves valuable, but trying to make them comparable to one another, trying to understand how to make sourcing decisions or understand if programs are having their desired outcomes, certifications, interventions, whatever that is. It's very hard to do using a study that is, a point in time. You really do need to be able to start to have that more real-time view of what's happening. And I do think we are moving towards a place where that is very feasible. But I think the part that's actually really complicated is that we are looking at comparison still. Like we really say, don't compare across material types. Like you cannot compare wool and polyester. You cannot compare cotton and viscose, like the systems that create those things are so different, and the studies that get created around them are so different that trying to compare them is comparing apples and oranges. What you can start to do is compare different types of cotton. You can compare cotton that is, one local farm, one project, to organic, to conventional. You can start to make some of those comparisons. But when we're talking about these more advanced ways of understanding impact and data, what you compare them to, I guess, like what is the reduction you're looking for? Is it absolute? Are you talking about pristine? I mean, that gets probably way into the weeds, but I think that the short answer is I think we are moving to a place where we'll have better data. I think how to translate that into the marketplace is the part where it's really complicated. And on the regulation side of things, that is one of the big topics around the world right now, especially in the UK and in Europe, is around stopping greenwashing, around making sure that claims that enter into the marketplace can be validated, are valid. And, data is one of the ways to do that. But being too reliant on an impact score or reduction in greenhouse gas at the product level, I think that is still a place where it's going to be misleading to the market because we don't have that data flowing in right now.
Yeah, I think that's really fascinating. And I think there's obviously so many people in the industry that are very heavily focused on this side of things. But when you look at the sort of broad landscape, it is very confusing for outsiders, certainly,
Yes.
and even for many insiders to really know how to direct their decision making accordingly. I mean, you obviously, both through your previous world and your work now, you cover all sorts around innovation, science and new materials, all the way through to new agricultural practices, or very traditional agricultural practices. Actually, is there an answer in terms of a single area the industry should be focused on in terms of making decisions around the right materials if we're going to achieve the climate targets that we have set before us? Is there one material, for instance? I know that's a really stupid question, but genuinely, is there a way that we should just be making tracks or is there one we should be moving away from even?
Yeah. I think not at this point. I think that within each material type, there is a better solution. And so, it would be unrealistic to say industry stop using polyester. Polyester makes up, just as an example, I'm not saying that, but if we were to say that, it's like 52 to 54% of all the materials, fibers used in a year are polyester in fashion. And so it's not realistic to say stop using it. What is more realistic is say if you're going to use a synthetic, whether it's a polyester or a nylon or an elastane, figure out a way that you're not using virgin oil. That feels clear. We have to move away from virgin inputs of fossil fuels. We have to increase recycling. We have to get our own system sorted out and closing the loop so that we have textile to textile recycling. That again is not an excuse for continuing to grow. Like recycling isn't a solution to everything. But when you think about synthetics, it is a way to remove the industry's dependence on virgin fossil fuels. Similarly, I would say, cotton is an incredible fiber. Right now, organic cotton only makes up around 1% of all the cotton sold. And so, instead of just having cotton, increasing organic, and I think really increasing practices around regenerative, looking at the things that have the biggest reduction opportunities in cotton, removing synthetic fertilizers and putting cover crops down, which I know are two really specific things, but those two actions alone would have a huge reduction in greenhouse gas emissions immediately, start to build soil health and biodiversity. Like there are interventions and opportunities within every single fiber type, which put you on the pathway towards a 1.5 degree alignment and towards, I think, the future we'd want to see. But again, within all of that, we have to slow growth. Like there is no world in which you just switch without slowing growth. When all the calculations we did, you just don't get where you need to go unless you address like everything at once. So we have 3 levers we talk about. Scaling existing. So that is things like recycled polyester and organic cotton. There's an innovation gap that we've identified, which is things like regenerative agriculture, which was not really an innovation in the way we normally talk about it, but it is in that it's not currently being captured in the databases that we do have, going back to data, like there's no life cycle analysis for it. It's not in the kind of widely used data set. So we put it in the innovation gap, even though it's a very ancient practice based on indigenous wisdom. And even textile to textile recycling would go in there. But then slow growth is the third one. Like you have to slow growth.
So let's come back to that last one, but just to grab hold of that middle one that you just mentioned there around
Yeah.
innovation. So yeah, totally understood in terms of why you put regenerative agriculture in there. But obviously, headline wise, we see so much about innovative new materials. Do you think there are some in there that actually can deliver?
I think they can deliver. I don't think many can deliver in the time frame that we have. I mean, we're talking about 7-8 years here for drastic change, really 7, closer, it's getting closer to 7. We have a 2030 deadline, for seeing at least a 45%, likely going to get moved up to a 50% reduction. It already is a 50% at an industry level. At our level, we'll stay still like at the raw material level saying 45, but 50% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. I think those innovations are going to be a part of the, maybe getting to the zero, 2050 is the net zero goal, but those are not going to get us where we need to get in the next 7 years. Doesn't mean people should stop investing in them and supporting them, but they can't take the place of drastic change in the materials that we're relying on now.
Yeah, got you. So, and as you said, the other side of this then is really around, not just what material is being used, but the volume and the speed also of the products that they're being made into. So let's just dive into that a little bit. You've said a few things in the past. I'll just read a couple of sentences. You says we must stop creating disposable fashion and we must slow down consumption. And we must decouple value creation from producing new products. You've briefly explained it, but let's just dive in a little bit more in terms of how is this a reality? How can this be a reality? That's the thing I think I'm most interested in, because it's one of those words, degrowth, gets bandied about at the moment in a really positive way, but not within the rooms of the executives actually that are capable of making those decisions.
No, I mean, it's a scary thing for those executives. I mean, I was talking to a brand a couple of weeks ago, and they told me this is a brand that actually is one of the few ones that has a pretty real degrowth strategy that they're working on. They have actually managed to reduce the amount of physical product entering the marketplace while increasing profit. Wow. And despite that, they're having investors asking them why they're not seeing increased numbers of products sold. That is a standard question that they get asked during their investor meetings. And so, I mean, we're talking not, so you've got a brand that's committed to this, that's doing this, that's walking the walk, but they're publicly traded. And so they're being asked a set of standards questions from investors as to how they mark if someone's going to be successful. If they don't see that increased product entering the marketplace, even if they're seeing increased profit, there's a red flag that goes up. So there's a kind of education and systems change that's huge and really needed. And I think it starts actually with investors and executives and like the people that are out there asking the questions and defining what success looks like. And we have not had that happen yet. I do think the kind of presence of the topic is getting bigger. We had our conference in November, and we had Dr. Jason Hickel speak, who's one of the, kind of main degrowth guys out there beating the drum, and pretty controversial to put up in front of a bunch of brands, someone like Jason. But, I had a lot of conversations with brands that you wouldn't expect. I'm not going to call any of them out, asking us kind of what we meant by that, why we did that. And they, when you sit down and talk to them and we say, well, what we mean is that like you have to increase the durability of your products. You have to think about how you sell less for more, how you offer, secondhand options, how you offer repair options, how you extend the life of these products without making it cripplingly expensive. Because, the other thing that we hear a lot is that we still have to have a place for affordable fashion. And, the topic of fast fashion all gets grouped together, but I think you have to decouple that so that you have affordable fashion and you have disposable fashion. And there's no room for disposable fashion in the future. It can't exist. We have to get rid of it, which again, coming back to the main topic is like where regulation has to come in. Like if products are being made in a way that is so cheap that they are being treated as disposable, with materials that are not meant to last in a way that is just truly filling up landfills, the government has I think, a responsibility to step in and say, these are not safe products. They're not fit for purpose. They're, not fit for what clothing is meant to be. And that doesn't mean everything needs to cost a fortune, but it does mean that we have to just move away from this idea that we can buy things and throw them away.
I really like that delineation, and it isn't one that's particularly spelt out. Everybody just is very anti-fast fashion because it is, grouped as this thing that is, negative, obviously. but actually separating those two out also removes the other argument, which says obviously that, you know, we're being non-democratic and worse in our sort of approach to thinking around how things have to be sustainable. Building on that, and actually from a slightly different angle, because your background is in a luxury brand, and I know I don't want you to dwell on specifics of working there, but it must be incredibly, I'm not sure the right word, empowering, liberating for you to be able to have these conversations outside of the confines of working for a brand, because it's so restrictive within there.
Yes, it is. And I mean, the reason I joined a nonprofit from a brand is I wanted to work across the industry. I mean, luxury plays an incredibly important role in setting the tone and, the direction of travel, like not to undermine that at all. And, there are some really big luxury brands out there. But when you really look at volume, it's not being driven by luxury. Volume of materials being used. Durability is already, should be, if it's not, if you're paying that much for something, it should be durable. It should be something that it's well made, even if it's something that's very delicate, it's well made, you care for it. There's this concept of emotional durability, which is often tied to price, but doesn't have to be, like paying more for something does typically mean that you treat it better. That doesn't need to be that way, but like there is a correlation to that and some research around that, around if you invest in something, you're going to take better care of it. You're going to mend it. You're going to go that extra mile to get it tailored. Whereas if you pay very little for something, that investment back into the product, for caring for it really well, getting it repaired, getting it tailored doesn't always, I guess, incentivize people. I think being able to break that down, but I do think that luxury already has kind of set itself in a place where it can be set up, and the changes can happen fairly quickly for resale. The resale marketplace, the Real, Vestiaire Collective, like these are healthy businesses. They're doing really well, and they're full of secondhand luxury products. Like that market, I think it's important. It sets the direction of travel. You still need those brands to be sourcing the right way, doing things the right way. But what we're talking about is change at a global level, and we're talking about transforming a whole industry. And I do love being able to have those conversations and help to be a part of that. I mean, the organization is incredible, Textile Exchange. Like I'm never the smartest person in the room anymore, which I love. And it's, to have a team of experts like we do, really, really in the weeds, thinking through the minutia of what each one of these problems means it's really exciting. I mean, it's really nerdy, but it's really exciting.
Nerdy is exciting. That's great. Do you see a world then where those conversations that you're having around degrowth and those conversations you're having around policy can indeed actually come together for this industry?
Yeah, I mean, the extended producer responsibility legislations that are being talked about are a great example of that. Like, basically saying that if you make something, you're responsible for it for a certain amount of time. And so, that means it shouldn't fall apart. We shouldn't be throwing it away. It should have a certain lifespan associated with it. So I do think policy will play a role there. Again, I think, I know that there's a lot of talk, and there's been a lot of work for a long time on something called the product environmental footprint in the European Commission. And I was a part of the very first wave of that, like in 2013, 2014, when I was at Stella McCartney. We were part of a pilot group of brands that did a product environmental footprint for non-leather footwear. And the intended purpose of testing this out, and it's come a long way since then, there's a lot of movement, but I think the purpose is the same, is that what the commission wanted to do, what they stated they wanted to do at the time, was to create an equivalency of an ENERGY STAR rating, but for the impact of clothing products. It goes beyond, clothing. It's products really widely, food, furniture, what is the impact of a product, so that customers can make those decisions. And similar to ENERGY STAR ratings, their intention is that the bottom of the market drops out. It's very hard to find an E-rated appliance these days. And instead, it started with A, but now you've got A+, A++, A++, it moves the market up towards being more sustainable, in that case, being more energy efficient. A lot easier with appliances, not so straightforward with product labeling and footprinting. All those things we talked about LCAs come into play here. It is very complicated, but I think the intention is there, of if you're looking at the footprint of something, you're thinking about so many elements coming in. And that's where the regulation can start to say, we don't accept the very bottom of the market. We're expecting the market to move up. And your right to sell into the marketplace means that you've met a minimal threshold of product compliance, environmental performance, human rights, all those things. Again, easier said than done, but I think the original intention behind that is still very nice.
Yeah, no, that's all really positive. And that brings us back really nicely to what we were obviously talking about at the beginning around the policy else that you put out there during COP around incentives. Well, first of all, the sort of logistics of that, you said one of the challenges now is obviously putting that into action. So what does that look like, and what are the sort of challenges and barriers around it that you're seeing and facing? And this is obviously not just on you as Textile.
No, certainly not. I mean, I'm certainly not even the one leading it internally, but I have someone who works on our team called Beth Jensen, who's brilliant, who worked at an organization in the US that was an industry association that had a more active policy arm, and we're starting to talk to them a little bit about what this could look like in the US. As a nonprofit, we don't lobby. We're not a member association. There's actually a pretty strong delineation. We're US registered between industry associations and nonprofits, and we're a nonprofit. I mean, you can be you are a nonprofit as an industry association, but like what you do is very different. Like we do represent the industry in that we have members, but our ultimate responsibility is to the mission and vision of the organization and to drive forward the things that we've stated in our strategy around greenhouse gas reduction, biodiversity, all those things. So, we do represent the industry, but that's not our ultimate purpose. Our ultimate purpose is to drive impact. And so to really, for us, implement this, we need to partner with those who do have more active policy arms, lobbying facilities. And that was always our intention. And that's what we've started to do. And that was the power of being able to launch this at COP, is it got the attention to kind of help us make those inroads towards organizations that can push this into governments in a more effective way. The role that we want to play is being able to kind of rally the industry behind this, but also make sure that the right type of science is applied, the right type of impact is actually being derived, through the decisions, that they're not superficial, but that impact is going back to the farmers. And that was the other thing that I really liked personally about this idea around preferential tariffs, is that, when you talk about cost cutting or scalability of cost or any of those things, you talk about cost cutting, you actually cut cost along the way. And almost always that gets pushed back to the very furthest part of the supply chain, to the farmer, who often has the least voice in the system. This doesn't do that. This just, the saving, the cost cutting is at the very final stage in tariffs. And so it allows for there to be that same economic incentives along the way, and especially at the farm level, where farmer is actually being paid more to produce something. And that gets passed along, and it only at the very end is where the cost saving is, which I really liked about this. Yeah. And that's what we want to do, is play that role to make sure that that part stays intact, because that's very important.
Yeah, I think it's so easy in every part of this industry to forget about the fact that at every single step there are people's lives very, very heavily involved in what we are creating, and every little change we're making here has that sort of knock-on effect, which obviously is a big part of the degrowth discussion, as well as around, how do you factor in the people whose livelihoods are dependent on what we are creating.
Yes.
I won't open that up as a topic as well, because that obviously is a huge one in addition, but it is incredibly interesting to hear you sort of thinking about that and talking about that with the work that you're doing around this policy side of things. Since COP, what progress and developments have you seen with this, and where do you think it's sort of heading?
I think the US is going to be where we start as far as the market goes. We've made the best inroads there. I can't say more than that at this point, honestly. Oh, did I freeze, Rachel, or am I okay?
No, you're good.
Okay.
Sorry, I think I spoke at the same time as you. I was just saying that does actually somewhat surprise me that the US market is sort of leading on it.
Yeah, I mean, there was some work that we can build off of that already been started in the US, which seems like a really good way in. We're a member of the Policy Hub, which is based I think they're based out of Amsterdam, but they work with the European Commission a lot. Honestly, everything happening, there's so much happening in the Commission right now around this, that this is probably not, there's so much they've got to get through that we don't think that's a good place to start, but we're continuing to kind of keep an eye on, if there is an opportunity to bring it in, we will. And I've actually had some good conversations in the UK as well. So potentially something here, but I think the US is actually going to be where we start, because if we were able to do something there, it also has such a large reverb that we think it would be a good way to kind of get things snowballing. So There'll be a bit more coming out on kind of our plans in May. We're in the middle of finalizing a few things, but that's going to be where we start.
Excellent. Well, we'll definitely look out for that. I'm going to open it up to questions quite shortly. I can see we've got one or two that have come in, but if anybody has more, please start posting them now. Before I do so, one of the things, and I think we've probably covered this really nicely already, but I'll get you to succinctly say it in a sentence. One of the things that we're asking all of our speakers this year to give us a view on is actions. It's really about how we close out our conversations on a really, really practical note. So actions that individuals and individual businesses can go ahead and do. So from your perspective, then, just to put this in a question, what is one crucial action that you wish to see from the industry in 2022?
From the industry, I would like brands to, or the industry, I guess, to truly step up with strategies to reduce pressure on new materials having to enter the marketplace. And I would like to see scaling of the existing opportunities that are available. I need that to start this year. I don't expect it to finish. I've never seen a transformation of a raw material supply chain take less than 2 years. So that's why we have to start now. Like, this stuff just takes time. Like, you don't snap your fingers and all of a sudden all of your farms can grow organic cotton. That's a 3-year transition. You don't snap your fingers and have your wool farms be able to have biodiversity plans. Like, that takes time and training and support. And so I'd like to see that starting. And maybe the biggest ask is for that investment in patience, because it does take time. These aren't quarterly results. You're not going to see something overnight. You're talking about systems transformation. And again, you're talking about individuals that need support.
Love that. Investments in patience. What a nice phrase. Finally, before I do open it up, you are very graciously a returning mentor for us on our Young Pioneers program, which, as Rosanna said, launches today, which we're really excited about. What I want to ask you is, what excites you the most about this next generation that we're supporting through this program and the future of this industry?
I mean, the next generation is so much better educated than I was. I don't know if you can say the same, Rachel, but like, yes. When I was starting out, I mean, sustainability, like, nobody was talking about it. So we were all starting at zero. I'm seeing people that can jump in. It's really exciting. People are doing so much of their self-education. I know that not all universities are providing this, but there's so much information available and people are so well educated that, you know, once they kind of get a little support or guidance or pointing in a direction, they just run with it. It's extremely heartening. There's also a sense amongst the younger generation that there is no choice. This is do or die. I mean, anyone who doesn't feel that way should maybe read some UN reports and they can cry themselves to sleep. It's not funny. It's not worth laughing at, but it's all you can do because it is quite horrifying. And so, I mean, I think that sense of this just has to happen is really great to see too, because it's not a choice anymore. It's just a matter of how do we do this?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you were such a phenomenal support last time. Everybody should know that Claire was not only a mentor last time, but she actually hired her mentee as well. So huge thank you for that. And I know she's getting on wonderfully at Textile.
Well, thank you for introducing me to her. She's wonderful.
As we just said, as to how much they can jump straight in and how great they are. So yeah, we're looking for 12 more incredible mentees to join us in the new program. So let me open up to questions. I can see that we have had quite a lot coming in. There's some in the chat, there's some in the Q&A box. I will jump back to the chat box. I'm going to start in the Q&A one. So this is from Zoe. Amazing conversation. Thank you. Do you agree the only way for this work is for shareholder primacy and ultimately capitalism to radically change? So this is obviously on the degrowth conversation. There's lots of questions here. I'm going to read them all out and we can cherry pick so we try and get through the rest of them. How do you persuade shareholders to vote against their own financial interests voluntarily? Do we need governments to step in to create regenerative and redistributive structures? So let's bundle that into one question. Okay. Essentially around capitalism, I guess. Yeah.
Well, and I don't think you have to ask people to vote against their financial interests to start, but I think you have to ask them to vote not towards supporting just more product entering the marketplace and looking at alternative revenue streams like secondhand or service offerings. You know, there's other ways that profit can be produced without having new product having to be made and new raw materials coming in. And so, I mean, I think that are big shifts that have to occur kind of on that capitalist umbrella. You know, one of the things, again, going back to Jason Hickley talks a lot about is that GDP is a completely insane way to measure progress and success. It's something that only got created after World War II. It's not a good way for us to measure economic success or the health of really anything. So I think that's not saying we have to stop capitalism, but it is saying we have to put new terms and mechanisms around defining prosperity within the system. And so that's how I would think about it.
Yeah, nice. And I love the fact that the guy that invented the idea of GDP actively said it should not be used.
It's really not a good measure.
And lo and behold, it does, and almost entirely. Okay, jumping over to the chat box. Sorry, I'm jumping around. What are your thoughts on mixed fibre textiles, cotton, poly, wool, nylon, cotton, spandex, etc., as recycling them is much more complicated and expensive than single fibres?
Yes, it is.
Caroline.
Good question. It's a very complicated one, I think. I think there's two things here. I always say, whenever I talk to young designers, especially, or designers in general, I think that you have to go in with knowing what you want that product to be. And so if you are creating something that is meant to last a very long time, let's take a Barber jacket, right? Barber jackets get passed down and passed down and passed down. Like, that is an extremely durable product. It has a coating on it. I don't know the technology behind it. My guess is it's very hard to recycle a Barber jacket. Like, to remove the coating from the cotton would be very difficult and make it hard to recycle it. But the intention behind that product was not for it to have to enter a recycling stream, but for it to be able to last for a very, very long time. And so that's how I think about blends as well, is that if you're creating something that's only going to last a couple of years, then making sure that you're creating something, it can still be a blend, but is it a blend that is not like 50-50? I think it's normally like an 80% threshold. It depends on the recycling technology, but for textile to textile recycling and chemical recycling, depending on the technology, there's a threshold. And so you can have some blend, but if you go over that, you can't recycle it. I think that's what you're getting to, is that knowing that, being empowered with that information and knowing, okay, this is something I'm creating. It's a piece of outerwear. It's, going to retail at a high point. I want this to last for a really long time. Let's figure out what's the most durable way to do that, versus athletic wear that, might wear out after a couple of years, and making sure that that athletic wear that, you're going to wear for a few years, you're going to wear it out, that can be recycled, versus, a piece of really durable outerwear. That intention at the beginning is important. So it's not a one size fits all, but it is having the intention for the product and being honest about it at the very beginning. Yeah,
super interesting. And I guess that nicely brings in how important it is for basically every single person within an organization to be involved in this sort of decision-making process.
Yeah, especially designers though.
Sorry, I mean every single person within the design process was but the organization as well. Okay, so Redeemer says, and this is something that we sort of briefly mentioned during the degrowth conversation as well, fast fashion means more production, more jobs, more money in the economy. How do we go around that?
It does. I think, again, not fast fashion, disposable fashion. Again, two things. I think something that is made at such a low price point, like such a genuinely low price point, that it's disposable are always exceptions to the rule, but it is Fashion Revolution Week. There's been a great deal of research produced and shared by that organization around how you can't really make something under a certain price point and have it be ethical. So it depends what type of jobs you're talking about. This is a very complicated topic that I am not the best versed on to kind of manage, but again, we're not talking about stopping all production, but we are saying, let's think about what it actually should cost to make something, so that you're not supporting forced labor, because that is a real issue in fashion supply chains, that you're not paying a wage that makes it impossible for a person to live along the supply chain. Those are considerations we have to take into effect. And I think the Who Made My Clothes campaign, again, going back to Fashion Revolution and Love Clothes Last, those concepts, those are quite radical, but they're important in getting that kind of visibility and thinking of, what do I really want this product to do? If you're a designer, like, do I want people to be able to make a wage that they can feed their family on? Or, is the bottom line, let's just make it cheap and fast and it's a disposable product?
Thank you very much.
I don't know if that answers it, but
it does. As you say, it's incredibly complicated one.
Yes.
But it's an important one for us to all sort of acknowledge and I think myth bust a little bit around as well. Okay, Nainika asks, is there a perception bias that policymakers and legislators still have against the fashion textile industry where it's not taken seriously enough? We saw this a few years back when the Environmental Audit Committee's recommendation to levy a 1p recycling charge on all clothing sold was rejected.
Yes, I think in short, that is really very real. I think it is slowly changing, but there has been a perception that's a frivolous industry, and it's not really worth the time of regulators. I get really tired of, it's the this, it's the that, it's the second, it's the fifth worst, it has the same footprint of the aviation industry. There is, some need for that to kind of put a level of seriousness around it so that it's not kind of discounted. But yeah, it has been. I think it has been not taken as seriously as regulators as it needs to. But we are seeing that shift. There is, I think the presence that the fashion industry had at COP26 was really significant, and first time that it happened. I've worked a lot with the UNFCCC over the years, and the feedback from them, the UN agency that puts on the COPs, was that there's never been that kind of presence from the industry, that the kind of policymakers, the world wasn't ready to hear from fashion, and that is shifting. So historically, yes, and I don't think we're there yet, but I think that we're starting to see a bit of change there. I will say that part of that is that the fashion industry is very confusing to shift. I've worked in it for a long time. I understand some of the things that need to happen, but it's even confusing to me. Every business have a different way of producing. There's not a single, one way that everyone makes products. Supply chains are huge and disaggregated. Very few companies have traceability back to their raw materials, almost none. Honestly, if you really look at it en masse, like I don't know if anyone has 100 at scale, a largish, medium-sized company. I'm sure there's companies that are really small that are selling only cotton that do, there are exceptions, but if we're talking about business at large, none of them have that traceability back to raw materials, not 100%. That makes it hard for policymakers to understand it. I don't blame them. I think I can't ever tell if it's on purpose or if it's on accident. I think it's on accident, but we have to be able to figure out how to communicate opportunities to make change to policymakers, which, going back to what we started with, I think that's why the preferential tariffs is nice, is it's simple. It's something that they can understand. Comparing that to the product environmental footprint, which is I've been involved with over the years, so complicated and very confusing as to how you score the footprint of a product in a way that's representative of all of what you're actually wearing. That's very complicated and very hard for policymakers or anyone to wrap their head around. And so, yeah, we got an uphill battle, but we're making some progress.
Yeah, that's excellent. Thank you. Okay, let me just grab a couple more. We've still got time. Okay, Isabel asks, how does the implementation of a material regulation starting in the US for American brands have an effect on sourcing from global fibre and fabric suppliers, e.g. in Vietnam or India? How do you reach the fabric mills and farmers outside the US?
So we're looking at import tariffs, not specifically for US brands or US suppliers. And actually that's something we're working on figuring out more of, is how do we allow for both internal tariffs support, so tax breaks, opportunities to incentivize better from local production as well as import. But the idea was to start with import. And so there is, of course, always a possibility of having a negative effect, but the import tariffs ideally wouldn't change for organizations that are producing conventional. So if you're talking about, you're talking about Vietnam or India, if someone's importing or conventional cotton, virgin polyester, that stays the same. That's not a negative or a positive, that's status quo. However, if you're importing recycled polyester, you get a tax break or no tax at all. Import duty becomes removed. And so it incentivizes the positive without punishing anyone. And so that's the way we've approached it. This is not written into law. We don't even have a proposal, but that's the concept behind it.
Okay, great. Okay, where are we now? Right, Lara asks, thanks for the awesome conversation. I love the work TE is doing. How do we get brands to understand the importance of data to have an accurate view of the environmental performance of their products? LCAs are scary for brands, too expensive, too much time. They fear finding out something that they don't want to know, etc. Claire's nodding a lot.
It's so hard. It really is. When I was at Stella McCartney and a part of the Caring Group, we did an environmental profit and loss, which is a form of natural capital accounting. And it relies on LCAs, but it puts a lot of other factors. And I think at a brand level, it's a really valuable exercise. I mean, that's not something that we push as Textile Exchange necessarily, but just as a side note, that I think if you take a single data source in isolation, it's not very helpful. Our director of data and technology, who is extremely brilliant, talks a lot about data triangulation and how you have to always have at least 3 data points to be able to really make an informed decision so that you're not relying on a single source. And natural capital accounting kind of does that. Other ways to do that. What we're working on is a system that's a traceability system for certified materials that brings in impact data as well. But that is going to be only for certified materials as the first step. And so that doesn't solve everything, but I think it's a good way to start to make sense of impact, is that if you can have that information, if you're buying something that's certified, if you're buying organic cotton, recycled polyester, responsible wool, that you can have that visibility into the supply chain and start to understand the impact, it's going to be a good first step. I mean, again, you know, the tool that we took on from Google last year called the Global Fiber Impact Explorer is going to be another really interesting way, because it's not giving you a score or a number, but it's giving you a way of understanding risk and opportunity, which I think is also a good way. And there's more than 3, there's a lot of data sources in there, but it provides that kind of, you know, multifaceted view so that you can understand risk and opportunity instead of just trying to get stuck on a single number. But it's a lot. And so brands know that data is important, but they're as freaked out as the rest of us, I think, also trying to figure out how to solve for it.
Understandably. Okay, I think we're going to pause there. Prerna, the question that you've asked around livelihoods and degrowth, I think hopefully you'll feel that Claire already answered. You posted that, I think, just as she was answering it. So, but if not, if you feel like there's more, do please feel free to ping us afterwards. But otherwise, I'm going to pause right there on the questions and just come back to one from me. Claire, as I mentioned to you at the beginning, we always end on a quick fire round. It's just a fun little thing to close out on. We're very on time tonight as well. I'm really pleased with myself. So I'm going to give you 2 words. You just need to say one or other of them. This is just a little bit of silliness to end. They're all fairly obvious. Some of them might catch you out. Recycle or reduce?
Reduce.
Organic cotton or mushroom leather?
Organic cotton.
London or Montana?
Oh no. Both. I can't choose. I don't choose.
For anybody that isn't aware of that, hence her love of nature, much more significantly than London, I'm sure.
Yeah, I love London. It's why I live here. But I get to spend 2 months a year in Montana now, or three or 4 even. It's perfect.
That does sound perfect. Well, we love having you in London too. Okay, conference, debate, or peaceful street protest?
Peaceful street protest.
Okay.
No.
Farm or fashion show?
Farm.
2022 or 2032?
As far as what I want, I would like to be alive. I would like there to be a planet in 2032. 2032. Let's hope we did it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Claire. You've been absolutely wonderful as always. I'm so glad we finally had to have this conversation. I feel like we could have at least 8 more based on just little bits of offshoots of conversation there, but hopefully it's been valuable for everybody. And thank you so much for giving us your time this evening.
Thank you. And thanks for the great questions for the group. Those were great questions.
Yeah, always are. Our FashMash audience always bring it. So thank you everybody for doing so and helping to support that fact. Also, thank you to our sponsor, Klaviyo, and thank you to all of you for being here and listening. If you didn't get a chance to send some money through our Eventbrite for Textile Exchange to continue the great work they're doing, please do so. We will leave the link live via Eventbrite for the rest of the evening. And don't forget, we have opened our new round of mentoring as of today. You can go to our website to see it at fashmash.co.uk. Please share it. If you don't fit the criteria yourself, please do share it with everybody you know. We are really keen to get 12 wonderful individuals once more to join us on our program focused on sustainability, where Claire is one of our wonderful mentors. Claire, thank you again so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's great.
Thanks, everybody.
Have a great evening, everybody. Thanks.
Bye.